Hey everyone, welcome to the Elevate Life YouTube channel. I am your host, Jerla Prevalon. If you are new here, welcome. And in this channel, though, we focus on the stories of women, their joys, their traumas, their pain and suffering, and how they triumph through all of that. We also look to see how they've integrated Jesus and therapy into their healing story. Today, though, this series, we are currently going through this series called Starting Over Again. Basically, after a woman has experienced loss, trauma, grief, pain, and suffering, how have these women started over again? And so I have with us guests who will share their stories and who will inspire us or even normalize our stories of starting over again and help us to start over again. So today's guest is Reverend Dr. Liz Rios. I want you to stick around for just a second, and she will come on and share a little bit more about her story. So as promised, we are here with Dr. Liz Rios, and she is a dynamic speaker, preacher, social justice warrior. Let me tell you, I heard her preach one day in the midst of her season of healing. The whole room was just quiet, or jumping off of their seats by just what she was sharing. She is such a dynamic speaker and an encourager. And if you follow her online, she's funny too. So I want to turn it over to Dr. Rios so she can tell us a little bit more about herself, who she is, what she's done, her career path, and then we'll go deep into some of her story of trauma and healing. Go ahead, Dr. Rios.
Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate this opportunity. Again, it's always a privilege to share, any of our stories, right? So thank you.
Yeah.
So first, I always say to everyone, I am a native New Yorker because I live in Florida and I did not want nobody to judge me for that. So I grew up on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, born and raised in New York City, and ended up in Florida because I had a special needs son. And when he was younger, the doctor told us that we couldn't stay in New York City because he was constantly in the hospital. And they told us, if you don't want him to live in the hospital, you have to go to a warm climate. And so before she was even finished, my husband was already packed and ready to go to Florida. He had a sister here, so he felt like that was a good place for us to land. We ended up here, and we've been here since 2002. So way before all the cray-cray political things that are happening in Florida. But I believe, even in the midst of all this stuff, God has a plan for us here. And definitely he has a voice here that is contrary to the crazy things that are going on here. And I eventually started, this theme that you have of starting over. When you first invited me, I was like, oh my goodness, I could talk about that all the time because I feel like my life has been a series of starting over.
Yeah.
Moving from New York to Florida, I left a promising career as an assistant professor at a college to move down here, and I had to start over for real. I mean, not only in career, but in salary, honey, because Florida don't play nothing like New York.
Yes. I'm just thinking about New York to Florida. I mean, climate, culture, everything.
It's everything. There's nothing like New York City. I miss my New York. And as a matter of fact, right now we're thinking about getting a little condo there. So when we go back to New York, that we could always have a place to land over there.
Nice.
So that's what we're asking God for a miracle because everything's like 500,000. So we're trying to get something that we could afford, but that it doesn't have to be fancy. And I do miss New York City. I do think that there's a lot of things about New York that Florida will never be. Talk about culture. I mean, Florida is devoid of culture. Maybe because everybody's transient and nobody's from here, basically. I mean, when I meet a native Floridian, I shake their hand because they're like unicorns. They're very rare.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yep. I can imagine.
Oh my goodness.
Can imagine.
It's
yeah.
Crazy. But
well, we're grateful for you and your voice in Florida, because it's definitely needed in a place like that. For someone who is so Jesus-filled, so gospel-centered, so social justice-centered, we're needed in those places as well, you know? So I know you're having an impact. So when I met you, I started following you and your journey with your son, DJ, who you just talked about, which is one of the reasons you moved to Florida. So tell me a little bit about, and tell us a little bit about DJ and his life and your story of pain, suffering, and trauma with your little angel.
Yeah, so DJ was my second son, and I had kids kind of later in life. My first son, I was 32, and I was 34 when he was born, and he was born at 26 weeks, so he was considered a micro preemie.
Wow.
Right after a big women's retreat that I planned in New York City, and it was unexpected. Obviously, nobody wants to have a 26-weeker. And I remember as they're wheeling me in, the theme of the retreat was "But God." And I told my sister-in-law as they're wheeling me into the ER, "But God in it, right? But God, you know," and they're telling me, "Hey, there's a 50-50 chance of survival, and our priority is you." And so, you know, I'm already going in with, "Oh my God, is my son, you know, gonna die?" And when he was born, he was so tiny. His cry sounded like a cat's meow. And I was telling the doctors, "I don't hear him, I don't hear him." And they told everybody to shut up. And you heard his little like that.
Oh,
and yeah, it was beautiful. And I was so happy that he was alive, and he was doing really well. But in the hospital, about 3 months in, as they were waiting for him to reach gestational age, because he was supposed to be a Christmas baby, they told us that he developed an infection. And in that infection, they took 10 hours to give him medicine. And in that time, he developed a meningitis, which then led down to getting cerebral palsy and a few other things that developed from that, which we ended up suing, and we ended up winning 8 years later, but that's a whole nother story. Wow. He was really, I always say that his birth was the beginning of my rebirth, because you know, I was basically raised in church. You know, 10 years old, I started going to a Pentecostal church. And, you know, I was always told that, you know, we pray and God answers, almost like, you know, this genie God, right? Like, you know, just rub the lamp a little bit and he'll answer.
Right?
And so I realized during that time period that it didn't work that way.
No.
And, you know, I had everybody.
What an awakening, though.
Woo. Oh, it tumbled my house of cards of what I built my faith on. And I had my moments with God in the hospital room, because I remember hearing, to me, it was the Holy Spirit that told me that you're self-righteous. You think that you cannot suffer, but even the good and the bad, they both suffer. And I, you know, kind of like took it, I was a little bit taken aback by it, because I was like, "Oh my God, self-righteous, no." But you know what? I did believe that because I was one of his chosen people, that I wasn't going to go through drama or trauma.
Right.
And that was trauma for me. He ended up having a few surgeries before we left the hospital, which he was born in September, and we didn't leave until April of 2000. So you know, it was we were there for a few months living in the hospital. And all the while I was still doing ministry from my hospital room. You know, I was I had people come and support me there, and then I would go and do a women's conference or do this or that, because that's what a good Christian does, right? They continue going. They don't take time to experience what they're experiencing.
You gotta conquer in Jesus' name,
right? That's what we're told. That's what we're told. You know, stiff upper lip. You know, go forward. You're victorious. And so I probably went through that first year kind of numb, you know, and just showing up because that's what was expected. Right. I remember they told me, "Do you want some medication?" And I was like, oh no, a Christian doesn't take medication. I told my husband, if they would have offered that to me now, I would have said, give me it now.
Give me double doses.
Okay. You know,
because we're supposed to be tough. We're supposed to be strong because we have Jesus, you know, we don't need anything else, nothing foreign into our bodies, because we're supposed to be strong in Jesus' name, and we can do all things through Christ, right? So we don't need anything else.
Right. That's what we're, you know, and again, this is the hard part for a lot of people to get. Yes, I believe that my faith, just this morning, I was talking with my mentee and I said, we both said it. We don't know where will we be without our faith,
right?
With everything that we've been through, but there is okay to have, you know, Jesus in therapy. It is okay to have Jesus in some medication. Absolutely. And, you know, people, you know, I'm so glad that people like yourself and others are talking about these things, because there's still a lot of people that are in this bubble thinking that all these things are not of God. And, you know, God created science. God created these people that understand our bodies and the chemicals that go on in our brains and stuff to help us to get through these things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So DJ was from the beginning, you know, a person that God had used to challenge your theology, you know.
I say he was my master teacher, you know, and we called him our silent prophet, because he never spoke a word, but we learned so much from him, because not only in his lifetime, he died when he was 22, 8 months ago, but he went through 30 surgeries in his lifetime.
Wow.
And always with a smile on his face, always very content. And really, it was just the bookends of his life, his first 2 years and his last 2 years, that were really hard and kind of like spent in the hospital for about 18, 19 years of his life. It was great. You know, he was doing great. He never needed oxygen. We went on vacations together. He was well taken care of. I mean, it was great. It was just those two bookend parts of his life that he went through all the stuff. He was always challenged. You know, he had hydrocephalus, so he had a shunt. He was cortically blind, so they didn't know how much he could see. He had a seizure disorder, and he ended up later on in life getting asthma. And so, you know, he was involved, you know. But for the most of his life, he was great. He was doing great.
What questions did you have for God in the midst of that season? Like, where was God to you, and what questions did you have for God?
Well, you know, I'm glad you said it in seasons, because in the beginning, like I said, I was just like, if this is how you treat the people that serve you, I don't want to know how you treat the people that don't. You know? So I was, and I was a minister. I was actively involved in doing a lot of things, and so I just never really thought that I would suffer such a great tragedy like this, you know. But as I grew in my understanding and I saw my journey, I was like, it wasn't a tragedy, it was a blessing. And even though this was not God's perfect plan for DJ, it's just this captive world that we live in sin, and that's why that all was ushered in. I really believe that I would not be the person I am today if it wasn't because I was mother to this child. You know, so I don't see him as like a sad thing anymore. I don't see it like a tragedy, or like how could God do that? I see it more like, what an honor that God would think of me that highly, that he would want to give me a son like him.
Wow. He's not a tragedy. He's a blessing.
He's a blessing.
It's not a tragedy. It's a blessing. Because how many times we see people in our churches, in our communities like you, with a blessing like DJ, and we pity them.
Yeah, most people do. I mean, there's a reality about having special needs children in church, because church does a really horrible job of making people with special needs kids feel like they belong. And any time that they are making some kind of special arrangement, it almost feels like, do we got to do this? You know, So I think there is that reason why people, feel sad because, oh wow, they gotta always do the special stuff for her, or because they see that some people can't work, or some people don't have benefits, healthcare benefits. So that, many times people go bankrupt with special needs kids because they, they just don't have all the services. Thankfully for us, again, because we sued, and this was at the recommendation of his neurosurgeon, who was a woman, and I believe that God really convicted her, and told her to do that, to tell us that, because we always, as most people of color do, we thought, oh, doctors know what they're doing.
Right.
And she was the one who told me everything that's happened here is nothing but negligence, and if I was you, I would sue.
Wow.
And coming from her, I was like, okay, I'm gonna.
Wow. Good looking out, sis.
Yeah, she looked out, and she was a white doctor, neurosurgeon, and she said that. So I did look into it, and the first lawyers that we went to, they didn't want to take it, but the second ones did, because it's hard to prove premium cases. But because of that winning of that lawsuit, DJ had everything he needed while he was alive. Wow. He had everything he needed, so he didn't, really want for anything. But that's not the story for everyone.
For everyone.
And so, it is very difficult. So when we have people putting out policies that hurt, families with disabled children and family members, it bothers me because, nobody's putting themselves in that position of what would happen if I don't have benefits,
Yeah. Wow. What a perspective. So as you were in this journey with God, was there anything you remember him saying to you to sustain you throughout the journey? Was there a woman in the Bible, or even a verse or something? What was that thing that made you feel like I can continue on with God again? Like I can keep walking this walk of faith with God.
Oh my God, there's so many women in the Bible that I look to. But in this particular season, especially because I've never been through something as big as this, as losing a child. I mean, I don't think there's anything worse, maybe losing a spouse, but I really, I've never been through anything like that. So grief is difficult, and it comes to you, you could be just washing dishes and all of a sudden that wave of grief comes and everything. So with Rizpah, in 2 Samuel, I looked to her because she lost 2 kids, right? And she just continued, and I learned that, grief and trauma, they're like traveling companions, but also God's grace. Sometimes we feel like where is God in the middle of this horrible darkness? And you find that he's right there as much as you allow him to be. But I think the key to that is acknowledging that you feel what you feel. Tuning out the voices that say, oh, you have the victory, or tuning out the voices that say, God had a plan, this is God's plan. No, this wasn't God's plan. His plan was for us all to be in paradise.
Right.
And messed up, you know what I mean?
To flourish.
Exactly. So since that was distorted, we have all these other things that come into our lives. And so to me, I looked at another grieving mom and the opportunity to learn from her and to be able to say, she went through, debilitating pain. Yeah. She had such love, but she also had such courage, and her steadfastness in the faith, continuing to trust God, and turning that tragic moment into something that was one of her greatest triumphs, gave me that encouragement to just keep going. And I always say that I'm not the first and I'm not the last to go through whatever it is at the time that I'm going through it. Because this was my greatest loss, but it was not my first trauma or drama.
Right.
I've been a pastor, so I've been backstabbed. I've been, all the stuff that comes with pastorship. And I've been in experienced the things, with family members that, are not necessarily the ideal situation in families. So I could give you a list of all that stuff, but at the end of the day, it was my faith that sustained me. And because I believe that I could just tell God how I feel, I don't have to fake it with him. I could bring my total self to him, and he embraces me just as I am. So if I'm not feeling it, and I could say, God, I'm just throwing myself here at your feet because I need you to sustain me today.
Absolutely.
Today, I need you to give me an extra boost. Today, I need you to give me the spirit to move forward. And then when I feel good, you see me, when I feel good, sometimes I dance and I put it up on an Instagram.
Yes,
My days,
Yes. Isn't it amazing, though, that we can have the range of emotions with God? Like initially your journey started with God with, how could you do this, God? And then over time, it just transforms. Your heart becomes softened. God does something in the heart that allows you to receive comfort from him again. The same God who wasn't of a comfort before, and he allowed it. He didn't strike you down or anything, or as in previous times we used to believe, if you talk a certain way to God, God's going to do or cause something, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, come on now. God gives us the grace, and he gives us the space to have these real talks with him, hard and easy,
I remember that. I remember my somebody very close to me said, don't ask why. You don't ask God why. And you know what I ended up doing? I ended up having a little midweek study on asking God why. I've always been a rebel. And I did it. I said, you know what? No, I'm not going to accept that. I'm not going to accept that. No. I'm going to ask God why. And that was the beginning again of me learning just about dealing with all the things that come to your life, because life ain't perfect. And I think along your journey, you have to decide, are you going to believe him or not? Are you going to believe everything that you read, that you understand from your relationship, not out there, all that stuff that's kind of like abstract, but from your life, how you seen him show up in your life. Do you believe in that God? And if you do, it's going to help you to make the next right decision. And that's what I ended up doing. I remember a rabbi telling my husband when we were going through the beginning stages of having DJ and everything, my husband told me that while he was working, that he told this rabbi, I don't know, sometimes I just don't believe in God. And then the rabbi asked him, how do you feel when you don't believe in God? And my husband said, I don't feel good. I don't feel good about that. And the rabbi said, then keep believing. It's that simple. It's just that simple. And so what I feel like happened to me, the switch flipped in the sense that I don't believe in a genie God anymore. I believe in a God that is with me in my darkness and holds me. He doesn't keep me from the darkness. He's there with me in the darkness. So we have to stop believing in this God that lifts us up from all the trials of life. No.
Like goes around it. We got to go through it, not around it.
Exactly. And where do we learn from?
Exactly.
But we learn, there's a lot of people that go, I would never do that. You don't even know what you're going to do until you're in the situation.
Exactly.
And then how do you know? You have to be in it. So I learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was. I learned that my faith is bigger than I thought it was.
Wow.
And I learned that my God is more powerful than I thought he was. So, I don't curse any of the crises that I've been in.
Wow.
I don't. I've learned so much, and I've been made the person that I am today because of that. Now, of course, I don't wish it on anyone, and I wish I didn't have to go through it. But because I did, because I went through those things, I am the person that I am today. And honey, I love myself, okay? I love this person that has embraced herself, that has embraced her grays and her curls and her extra rolls and the deeper glasses and the opportunities that have come my way, and that comes sometimes with time, with the experiences of life.
Wow. Is it Sunday? Because you're over here preaching, and I just want us to pass the collection plate around, because I'm like, you giving it all. Yes, yes, and yes. Yes, yes, and yes. So before we end, I want to hear a little bit about therapy, medication, any of that stuff. Was that integrated in your healing journey throughout the process of healing?
So, I started trying to get a therapist, but I couldn't because I didn't want to settle. And
Mm.
I wanted someone that understood me as a woman of color,
Mm-hmm.
that understood my faith,
Right.
and and was able to deal with me from that perspective. And
Absolutely.
when I reached out to a few people, I couldn't find one. So I
Mm-hmm.
ended up with a spiritual director.
Yes.
And that was very helpful to me, that understood, all the different transitions of life, because women go through so many transitions.
Yes,
So
we do.
this was
Yes, we
the,
do.
the latest thing that happened in my life. But again, it wasn't the first major thing that happened. My friend used to call me the queen of reinvention, because
Mm-hmm.
again, sometimes life happens and it doesn't go the way you expected. It doesn't mean you have to crawl under a rock and disappear. You can
Right.
take the time you need and then get back up and say, okay, this is
That's
the
it.
person that I am right now.
That's
So
it. That's it.
I never took any medication, but like I said, if they would have offered it to me now as I would have said, let's do it.
That's right. That's right.
I'm not against it at all.
Yeah, I love
But
that you had a spiritual director, especially with the level of spiritual and conversations that you had with God, with the questionings, with the thoughts, with the whys, with the all of that, and that you would find a spiritual director to hold space for you as you just discern the voice of God in your life. For people who don't really know what a spiritual director is and what they do, can you give briefly, like a brief summary of what spiritual directors do?
Sure. I mean, usually spiritual directors are also trained people in spiritual direction.
Mm-hmm.
They've gone through some training, usually 1 or 2 years of training, sometimes more. And the difference between a spiritual director and let's say a counselor is that they basically redirect you to listen to the voice of God that's already in you, as opposed
Mm-hmm.
to a counselor that sometimes will give you like a list of, okay, these are the things that I want you to do, and some exercises, and or maybe
Right,
sometimes even diagnose you with something, depending on the
right,
level of
right,
education that they have. So a spiritual director is more of a companion, a spiritual companion, that like that space that you mentioned, where they're
right.
able to say, these are the things that I hear you saying that you've heard from God, and then they point you back in that direction, as opposed to
Mm,
a counselor. So
yeah,
to me, it was very helpful, because I was able, sometimes, even no matter how much education you have, no matter how many credentials you have, you still need a place where you can kind of dump some of the stuff that you're thinking, and have
right.
someone kind of help you see the patterns. Because when you're
Yeah,
in grief or you're going through a lot of transition, sometimes your mind doesn't allow you to see those patterns. So having
exactly.
someone else kind of help you through that, and kind of shift and sort some of those things that are happening, gives you a clearer picture.
Yeah. And what I hear you saying too is that our healing journeys are, each of them is unique. Some people might need a spiritual director like yourself. Some others might need a therapist and medication. We have to really focus on what it is that we're needing. Not what this woman did, not what this other person did, but what is it that we're needing in this present moment for our healing journeys. And I love that you were able to find someone to just hold that space for you, to process and to really discern the voice of God in your life. Before we end, anything you would like to share? And I would love for you to leave with a word for a woman who's listening to this and who's starting over again. So anything else you want to share, and a word for the woman listening to this, and they've gone through some kind of pain and suffering, and they're getting ready to start over again, and they're in the process of starting over again. What are some words of encouragement would you have for that sister?
Well, I mean, in the scripture, we always hear that God is always doing something new, right? There's always rebirth. Even in death, there's always rebirth. So depending on what anyone is going through right now, what you think is going to kill you, right, may build you, not kill you. And just take the time that you need to experience whatever that is. Don't let anybody rush your process, because for me, I would have went to a counselor if I could have found one. But I didn't give up. I found someone else. And so a lot of times we think, especially depending on our backgrounds and our religious traditions, we think that we can do these things on our own, and maybe even feel like we could put a badge of honor that we did. You don't have to go through it alone. And God is always about reinvention. He's always about new birth. So give God the opportunity to do something with your life in a new season.
That's right. That's right. Thank you so much. This is so good. I mean, I feel like we can sit here for another hour to talk and just ponder the ways of God, because there are so many things that are nuanced in the Bible, so many things that we just have to let God be without necessarily controlling it. And I got a sense of just how you were talking today, that you just allow God to be in your life and allow God to be a part of your healing journey. So thank you for gracing us with your presence. I don't love what has happened to you, but I'm grateful that God has allowed you to use it in your ministry to support others and to elevate others. So thank you, Dr. Rios.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure. And absolutely, I could have kept going.
Yes, that's right. I know you're Pentecostal. You could have kept going.
No.
Well, thank you once again.
Thank you so much.
All right.